All right, welcome to today's video. Today we're going to continue talking about databases, and in particular we're going to go into connecting a database to our PHP application. And so we're going to be talking about something called PDO, which is the PHP data objects. And you can see that I provided a link in our reading here, not to go through all of this, but just as a great resource, really the kind of the source documentation for PDO and PHP. Take some time, read a little bit of this, in particular, run through some of the content here, probably PDO statements, PDO exceptions, just to get a basic understanding of how it works. Again, that's the purpose of the lab this week, as well as the core focus of the videos as well, is just to get some real practical, basic, hands-on, knowledge and practice with these. So that's what we'll be doing today. As far as the actual code then, what I have uploaded to our class folder is inside of the PHP folder, inside of the sample code, is a file called pdo.php. And so that's what we'll be working with today. What I have done is I have downloaded that into my virtual machine. And then I move that from the, don't need that. I then move that into my HTML folder, so into the document root of the web server. So if you go to your computer, var www HTML, as we've moved other files, I move that to that location as well. And the reason why is because we need to access this page through our web server in order to get the PHP to execute. All right, so that's where it's located. The page itself then, localhost.pdo, and we'll go through really just a basic example of connecting the application to the database and then being able to query a little bit of data from it. Now, when you think back to when we set up WordPress and you set up the Drupal site, one of the first things that you had to do once you downloaded that code was you created a database for it to use, and then you changed a settings or configuration file. And in there, you put in the database name, where the database was located, typically localhost or 127.0.0.1, as well as the username and the password. And so we'll do the same thing here with the sample code, except that we're just going to do it all in one file. We're going to have a relatively straightforward example to work through. If you open up pdo.php, this is what you'll see here, a very simple and hopefully relatively straightforward file for us to work with. And this is also going to be kind of the foundation for the Lab 8 template as well. And I'm going to come back around here in the next video when I talk about sessions, and we'll use it some more. And so hopefully give you a pretty good foundation to really get through that Lab 8. As far as the code goes, I'm just going to have some basic HTML. It's almost irrelevant at this point. In fact, I could remove most of the links here because we're not using them. Same with the body and the div tag. The focus here is on the PHP and getting our application to connect to a database. We're using PDO, and I'm using PDO because it is a very popular way in order to connect to databases using PHP applications. It also helps with security. There is something called SQL injection, and again, we're not going to have a lot of time to go through that, but it's a prevalent issue to this day, and it has been for a long time with applications and the way that they develop their SQL and handle the user supplied input. PDO allows us to do a prepared, execute what's called a prepared statement, and that does help. It doesn't completely eliminate or isolate your application from SQL injection, but it does help. And so again, it's one of those topics I encourage you to do a little bit more research on your own time. For now, though, I just want to show you some basic usage, basic example of using PDO. So let's see. First thing that you're going to need to do then in order to interact with a database is you're going to be able to need to connect to it. And we're going to call this our handle to our database server. We're going to do this with a variable called DBH, or database handle. Keep in mind, we're doing PHP now, and so everything that we write has to be within this opening and closing PHP tag. With a PHP application, you have this combination then in a .php file. You have this combination of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then PHP. PHP, this is what's executed on the server. This is what allows the application to connect to a database and then return these results as part of that HTTP response. Okay, so this is the statement here, DBO or DBH equals new PDO, and then this is how we connect to the database. All right, so we have our host, localhost, database name, CSC292. So if you created that table according to the last video, you'll have a table, a database called CSC292, and then our username and our password. Right, all the same information that we provide in a WordPress site, in a Drupal site, and in a lot of other frameworks or content management systems that you'll use, you'll do very similar things. Where is the database server? What is the database name? And what is the username and the password? Okay, from there, we construct our statement. And so we spent the last video going through some basic examples of SQL statements. Now what we're doing is we're moving those statements and their creation into the application itself. So we have a string, dollar. Remember, dollar is how we define a variable in PHP. So dollar user select equals double quote, right? This SQL statement is just going to be a string value. So in this case, I'm saying select star from user. Okay, with PDO, it's a two-step process. We have to prepare and then we execute. And so what you see is that we have another variable. I called it select because that's what I'm doing with this particular operation. And I say database handle, that's a dash and then a greater than sign, prepare, and then the variable that is our select statement. Right, and so that prepares our statement. And then from there, we say select execute, and that executes the statement. Right, so this right here is the basic process of connecting to a database, preparing a statement, and then executing it. This can be anything. This just needs to be valid SQL. It can be a select, it can be an insert, it can be an update, delete, and of course there's much more complex SQL that we can create. Right, but this is the basis of getting us to the point where we have that to execute. We define the statement as a string value, we prepare it, and then we execute it. Right, and you're going to be able to use this format for the lab. Right, so it's important just to understand the basics of what's going on here. Once we do that, we oftentimes want to be able to determine what happened. In this case, we have a select statement, and so we want to be able to see the results of that select. We want to be able to access that data because we're looking for that result set to use in our application. And so one of the first things that we can do is we can determine how many rows were returned. And so we have in the select variable right here, once we execute the statement, we have that result set. So we can say result set dash greater than, and what this is allowing us to do, this dash greater than, is these are objects, and they're allowing us to access properties and methods on those objects. So select, we're accessing the row count method on that select object, and we sign that into the row count variable, and then commented out one too many lines, we can echo the row count. So we have the echo statement in PHP, echoes print, and if we print a value, then it really, what it essentially is doing is it's printing that content wherever it happens to be, wherever that statement happens to be within the HTML document. So you can see here that this is going to be an echo inside of this div tag, so the response will be this string value printed inside of this div tag. That's what the browser, the client, receives. Right, so row count, the number of records, and then that's the line break HTML character. So if we go ahead and we refresh that page, you can see view page source. Right, there's our div, there's the other div, and then there's the content that I printed or echoed from that PHP script. And you can also see that it provides me a value of 2. And if we look at what's currently in my database, you can see that I have 2 records right now, 1 and 2, an ID of 1 and 4. Okay, the next thing that we'll talk about here then is our ability to iterate over that result set, right? Because I have 2 columns, 2 records returning that result set, I asked the query, I asked the database to return everything in the user table, so I just happen to have 2 rows. We can iterate over that collection, right? We have this object, select. Select represents the result set because we did execute right here. So this object represents what was returned from that SQL statement. So we can put this logic here inside of a while loop, and we can say that while we are able to fetch a row, we store that result, that one record, inside of this row variable, and now we can access that variable using basically an array. So row and then the index becomes the column name, and that gives us the value. All right, and there we go. So that iterated over the result sets, and we have username, user1, username, user2. If we want to access a different property, let's say that we want to access the password, then I could say row password. Okay. And there we go. Now if I save that and refresh the page, and there's those values as well. Right? This returns an array, and the indexes in that array are simply the names of the columns, which is how we're accessing those elements or those values right here. With PHP, remember, keep in mind or recall that the dot is the string concatenation. It's a little bit different than JavaScript. With JavaScript, you have the plus operator. With PHP, you use the dot. And so you can say, string value dot, and this concatenates one long string value in order to produce that output. Right? The fetch, right? So we have different options here for the fetch, and we're not going to get into too many details there. I provided, and let me see, I got to go back to my other browser here. If you talk about, or if you look at the documentation, you'll find that inside of here, I think it's under PDO. Yeah, I'm not sure where it is now. It's inside the documentation here, and so that'll go into more details about the different options that are available as far as being able to select data. Right. So again, just the basic understanding. We connected to a database server inside of our application. We generated an SQL statement. We prepared that statement. We executed it, and now we're interacting with that result set. Either calling a specific method that gives us just the row count, or iterating over that result set, allowing us to access each column and each row, right? And so it depends on what we want to do. For the lab, we're going to take a look in the next video. We'll take a look at how we can use this basic logic here that we've started off with to kind of fill out that, I've provided a template for Lab 8, how we can use this to start to fill out that template and get to a slightly more robust example. As well. And for the lab, we don't need to iterate over the contents. We're doing something just a little bit more simple. All right, so let's see. I think that's about it. Hopefully this gives you an idea, at least a starting point for how this is going to work. If you have any questions, as usual, please let me know. If you would like more in-depth explanation or something, let me know. The purpose of the lab, though, is to give you that practical hands-on and hopefully help all of this kind of start to solidify in your mind. So with that, that is all I have today, and I'll see you guys in the next video. We'll talk a little bit more about connecting the dots here with Lab 8. So I'll talk to you guys then.